welcome everybody. Um, we're so fortunate to have all of our guests. Kathy is going to tell some stories and sing a song, at least one. And we're going to do this a little, and we have Ann Barker here who has a particularly interesting story and a family connection. Oh, I'll let
Thank
you to Elizabeth. We're going to do this a little differently than we usually do. I will give a rather brief bio of Elizabeth. Then Kathy will tell some stories and sing. And we will open it at that point to sharing. So if you have a story you want to share, that's when we like to hear it. At the beginning, we usually wait till the very end after a video. But this time that's how we're going to do it. And then when folks have shared, we will watch a very beautiful, it's almost a 3-hour long video. So I imagine that there'll be people who need to depart or whatever. And we'll stop recording after the sharing. And that video is available anytime. I'm just amazed that, wow, the quality is wonderful. It's Charles talking, Wendy, Kathy, Dana Ferry, Jeff. It's wonderful sharing about Elizabeth. So, but there's no need to record it again. We will have already recorded all the fresh news stories. So, without further ado, I will just briefly give you the highlights of this amazing lady's life. She was born July 26, 1896 in Chicago. Baba named her Dilruba, which means stealer of hearts. And I'll skip to her, I'll just give you the highlights, and there are many. In World War I, excuse me, my dog. In World War I, she drove an ambulance for the Red Cross. And Phyllis has a lovely thing to say about it. I'll just quote him. Phyllis says in The Awakener, I find it interesting that Baba chose a woman to be at the wheel when this so-called, wait. Phyllis was talking about his accident. When the so-called accident spilled the avatar's blood on our soil. Certainly in a way she had been prepared for it. She had driven a Red Cross ambulance in France during World War I. She had driven Baba and the girls thousands of miles over the rough roads of India in her Buick during the Blue Bus tours and also in the US. Baba once said, when he allows someone to drive him, it ensures that they will not get lost while traversing the path through spiritual planes. Thus, she was a modern feminine Arjuna for her dear Krishna Baba. So, on to, she went on an expedition to the North Pole. It was a scientific expedition, and she was one of 5 foreigners. That was the term they used. And she came within 400 miles of the North Pole. That was in July 1931. And the same year, Chris, and the same year, November 1931, she met Baba at Harmon on the Hudson. The Schlosses, Malcolm and Jean, were friends, and that was her connection. They invited her to Harmon on the Hudson. And she said that seeing Baba was a moment of instant recognition. She said his silence didn't seem strange or awkward. She had dreamed of him 3 times when she was only 12 years old. So then she's an insurance broker or agent, I guess. I don't know quite what the term is, but for 30 years for a Wall Street fund selling insurance. And conveniently, when the accident happened in 1952, she had 5 policies. which helped to pay for the expenses of the injured party. Let's see. Baba allowed her to stay in Panchgani Cave overnight, which was kind of a rare occurrence. Let's see. He allowed only 2 other disciples, Baramji and Pleader, to stay there. She was on May 8th, 1939, she was to stay in the cave exactly 12 hours. Baba himself locked her in, telling her not to fall asleep. She had a paranormal experience that night, and when she asked Baba if it was symbolic, he said yes, and she would understand its full meaning later. And another interesting experience that she and Norina had, this was in 1932. They were driving out west in their search for a center. And somewhere in the western desert, they lost their way. Suddenly, a man in a car ahead of them beckoned them to follow him. They did, but when they stopped to thank him, his car had disappeared. They discovered a bridge had washed out on the original road. If they had followed it, they might have been killed. In Hollywood, Baba said to them, to save them, he had to send one of his Abduls or agents. So, then of course, the big story with Elizabeth is the founding of the center, which Baba had said had to be given from the heart. It had to be a gift from the heart. And his qualifications for the land for the center would be virgin land with a freshwater lake beside the ocean, and be a gift from the heart. So I won't go into that whole story. It's the big story. But so I think at this point, Elizabeth passed on December 6th, 1980. So I think at this point, Kathy, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Betty. That, amazing hearing those stories, some of which I haven't heard before. It's incredible. What an amazing soul, and how fortunate we were to have known her. Amazing soul, and one of Baba's close circle disciples. Through a series of circumstances, I had the great good fortune to work at Dilruba, of course, the house named, after Elizabeth, I guess, yes, that name given by Baba. And at that time, I really didn't realize it, but it was a year and a half before she passed. Kitty lived another, from 79 to 91, 11, 12 years, because she really had longevity in her genes. But Elizabeth was really, at that time, at the end of her life, and yet so vital and so intensely actively involved in the center behind the scenes. She said to me once she was glad that Kitty was there, that she felt that they were a perfect duo, she behind the scenes and Kitty, the people person. And of course, Elizabeth had this attention to detail, which I had gone into during the last wonderful Zoom that happened in 2020. A story, another attention to detail in service to others, in service to maintaining the center. Attention to detail. Elizabeth had me drive her to the cove. I think it was actually the time that the Shaws were coming, and she wanted to make sure that there was a proper teapot and teacups that had no chips or cracks, because she knew that Jean Shaw loved her morning cup of tea. And as we approached the door of the cove, one on the left, I think that's called Cove 2, she uh, remarked as I said, "Oh, Elizabeth, there's a weather vane on top of the cove. I'd never noticed. There was a beautiful old weather vane with a kind of a cupola and then a rooster with an arrow pointing in the wind direction. And it was so beautiful. And I said, I'd never noticed that weather vane. And she said, yes, dear, you have to pay attention to details, to every little detail. That became a kind of a life lesson for me because of course what she meant was in service of Baba, in service of others. That's what I tacked on. The way she lived was like that, was attention to detail, always thinking ahead, what would help, what would be of service to someone else. uh, she had this tremendous poise which was illustrated in a story. One day, as the phones were ringing off the hook, Kitty had a line of people outside. I was supposed to be preparing lunch, and I also was asked to change the sheets on the beds in the guest bedroom. And I had rushed in there, short sheeted one of the beds, and was, I think, cursing under my breath as Elizabeth walked into the room, sat down on the other bed, and I said, "Oh, Elizabeth, I'm so upset. I've just got to tear the top sheet, the bedspread off, and I forgot the top sheet, and I've got so much to do." And she very calmly, sitting on the other bed, said to me, "Yes, dear, we have to work to find poise in the midst of intense activity." I mean, that was the story of her life, really, and Kitty's, finding poise in the midst of intense activity. So that was another life lesson. I also was aware of her, another attribute that was inspiring was her really not liking people to complain. She had had an accident as a younger woman, I heard, and that on a horse, and that's one reason she was stooped over. I think she was in a lot of pain. I had to take her every week for her B12 shot because she had pernicious anemia, but she would never complain about not feeling well. And that was, you know, just something that was very important to just be aware of. Uh, Once when I took her to the doctors, she said to me jokingly, "Dr. Payne," the name of the doctor was Dr. Payne. "Dr. Payne, that's not really a very good name for a doctor, don't you think?" Uh, sort of laughing about her having to go for her pernicious anemia shot. At the very end, after a mini stroke, when she was back home before her major stroke, toward the end of 1980, a number of us had the good fortune to be asked by Jane to stay with her at night. And she would get up and we'd have to help her to the bathroom. And she would never complain. She'd always make little jokes and, you know, excuse, please excuse me for giving you all this trouble. I mean, she was always amazing. I remember she said after coming back from the hospital the first time after the mini stroke, she said, um, "Yes, that was one of the most difficult tests they gave you in the hospital, having to wait in the emergency room for so long on I think there was like a metal gurney that, they put her on. And, that was one of the most difficult tests they gave you there." She just was joking about this travail that she had to pass through. Anyway, many, many, many more stories. My final quick little story, singing with Bob Brown in the old meeting place. Somehow Bob got the idea he wanted to sing Jeremiah Was a Bullfrog. and he started singing, and then he fell down, as many of you have seen, and on his back with the guitar on his stomach, and his feet are up in the air and his shoes are flying off, and he's singing joy to the world, and I'm standing there next to him trying to kind of carry on with singing harmonies as he's doing his Jeremiah act. And I look out and I see Jane and Elizabeth sitting in the audience about halfway back, and Elizabeth was literally doubled over in laughter. And she, who was so composed for the most part, was just hysterically laughing quietly, and that is a wonderful memory to keep in my mind forever. So thank you, Elizabeth, for all the many loving lessons and the opportunity to serve you for that, and thank you, Baba, for that gift. And before we have some other wonderful additions, I'd love to ask if I would sing the Song of the Soul. I took Elizabeth to the Methodist Church downtown, and a new woman minister preached a sermon, very unusual back in the later 70s, and then whipped out a guitar and sang this Song of the Soul. Of course, the chorus says, "Why don't you sing along?" Nobody knew the song but me. I was trying not to sing along because the church was filled with people who didn't know the song. But Elizabeth heard me humming and had me sing it to her on the way home. And then she would ask me to sing it now and then when visitors would be coming to the center. So she loved this song. Is the sound okay? Okay. Oh, good. Oh, good. Love of my life, I am sighing, I am not crying, I am dancing, dancing along in the madness. There is no sadness, only the song of the soul. Let's sing this song. Why don't you sing along? And we can sing for a long, long time. Why don't you sing this song? Why don't you sing along? And we can sing for a long, long time. What do you do for a living? Are you forgiving, giving shelter? Follow your heart, love will find you, the truth will unbind you. Sing out the song of the soul. Let's sing this song. Why don't you sing along? And we can sing for a long, long time. Why don't you sing this song? Why don't you sing along? And we can sing for a long, long time. Come to your life like a warrior, nothing will bore you. You can be happy. Let in the light, it will heal you, and you can feel you and sing out the song of the soul. Let's sing this song. Why don't you sing along? And we can sing for a long, long time. Oh, why don't you sing this song? Why don't you sing along? And we can sing for a long, long time. and sing for a long, long time.
Beautiful, beautiful. Oh, Kathy, you must come and give a concert. Oh,
But
we need more. We need a concert from you.
well, yeah, we're going to be up at Music Sahavas. Maybe that'll be recorded and it'll get on, Zoomified with your Zoom.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, thank you so much. Oh my goodness. Oh,
Thank you for asking.
so at this point, we I'm gonna ask those of you in the audience to share if you have a story. I'm told that Anne definitely has a story, and I'm hoping that more of you do. As I say, I may have. We're doing the order of things a little differently this time. We're having sharing, and then I will play a very long, wonderful video. But I wanted to get all the personal personal remembering in now first. So maybe Anne, would you start?
All right, thank you so much, Betty. I had a conversation with my great uncle Marion Wright the day before Elizabeth passed away. I was traveling down to the center and stopped to visit them in North Carolina. And I told them that I was going to the Mayher Center. Immediately, he said, "Oh, I've been there," which totally shocked me. And he began to tell that he had known Simeon Chapin and had gone duck hunting at Long Lake with Mr. Chapin. And that I said, "Well, did you ever meet Mayor Baba?" He said, "No." And I said, "How about Elizabeth Patterson?" He said, "Oh, yes, I was her attorney. And she was a wonderful woman. I thought very highly of Mrs. Patterson." He said, "However, there was one peculiarity about her." I said, "Well, what was that?" Whenever she came to the office and he would have papers strewn across the desk ready for her signature, having to do with her, I guess, her personal business, but also the Mayher Center's business, because he was a corporate attorney, she would say, "I cannot sign any of the papers until I send a cable to my master in India and receive his approval." So Marion thought that was really strange. And so he would have to wait until she would come back the next day and say that, yes, she had received a cable from Mayor Baba that she was given permission to sign the paperwork. So that was my story about Marion. However, an interesting connection with this is that Marion and his second wife, Alice Norwood Spearman, were both very involved with civil rights, with Marion, even from the 1920s. And that's the reason he went into corporate law rather than criminal law, because he knew that the judges were so against his work with civil rights. And I just want to show this book, Human Rights Odyssey by Marion Wright and Arnold Shankman. And this is a collection of his speeches on civil rights that he gave up and down the East Coast. Okay, thank you very much for letting me share that.
Thank you, Anne. What an amazing connection. Wow. I'll bet you were surprised to hear that he Wow.
And you might talk about what happened when you arrived at the center, because you got there on an auspicious day.
I arrived that afternoon and with my 4-month-old daughter, and the next morning at 8 a.m., Marshall Hay came to the cabin to tell me that Elizabeth had passed away. And also, even when I was checking in, I was told at the gateway, asked, did you know that Elizabeth is seriously ill? And I said, no, I had not heard that. And they said, yes, she's in the hospital. So I was able to go to her memorial service during that time too.
Had you met her before or not?
Yes, I had met her only briefly, really. I was in a small cabin by myself and was taking a nap, of all things. It must have been about 78. And there was a knock on the door, and Carrie, who was one of the young women also taking care of Elizabeth, asked if Elizabeth might come in. So I said, yes, just give me a minute. And I was racing around trying to put my clothes on and straighten the place up a little bit. And Elizabeth very slowly got out of the station wagon and very slowly and painfully walked up the steps to come into the cabin. And she apologized for interrupting me and inconveniencing me. She stepped out onto the porch and she walked over and adjusted a tiny lampshade to make sure that the new lampshade was suitable and fit the lamp properly. That was the only reason she had come in. So I was very touched by that. But as Kathy was mentioning, very detail oriented.
And everybody, that really reminds me of the first time I met Elizabeth. My friend Annie and I were in the lake cabin, 2 beds there. Early the next morning, we hear the screen door open and somebody moving about in the other room with the bed in that second room. And we got out of bed and peered around, and there was this woman with white hair testing the mattress. And she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't really know anybody was here, or sorry to bother you. I'm just checking the mattress." And then she walked out, and we later found out that was Elizabeth Patterson. Similar sort of story.
Thank you, Anne and Kathy. Anyone else with a story? Oh, Judy.
Hey, Bob, everyone. Good to see you. I have a bit of an unusual story with Elizabeth. It was in 1986, and actually, Kathy, you were in the room I woke up with the morning I'm going to speak about, which was Women's 3, W3 in the original PC, Pilgrim Center. And I woke up at about 5 in the morning and felt very this drawing of, get up, get dressed, and walk up to the samadhi. I didn't know that there were rules about, you're not supposed to go by a certain hour. This was an inner nudging from Baba, and I followed it. And as I walked across the road, past Glory Shaw's monument, his tomb shrine, and after you cross the railroad tracks, there's a road that small, in those days, a small path. And just as I crossed that road, not the highway, but the path starting up the hill, Mayor Baba appeared beside me in full form and took my left hand in his right hand. He was as tangible as if I were in the room with any of you and holding your hand or embracing you. He looked as Baba did in 1938 when Elizabeth, I later went back and checked at the centers at the library, went through the pictures of Baba. And when I came to the one, I didn't know that Elizabeth had taken the picture at that time of Baba holding the baby goat. I think most of you know what that one is. At any rate, so he appeared as he was in 38. But again, he was in physical form, and he walked me up the hill in silence and took me toward the samadhi. And as you that were around in those years know, because Mara was still in the body, there was only Baba's samadhi there. There were no tombs of the women mandali at that time. But he didn't take me to the samadhi. He walked me over to the earlier graves that were there, and he walked me straight to Elizabeth's grave. And he looked down at Elizabeth's grave and said with such sweetness, such gratitude, such love, Elizabeth loves me very much. And then he took me to the tree. There was a banyan tree. It's since died and has been removed, sadly for me, because it became very dear to me because Baba leaned me into it. And there's more to my story, but this is the part that's connected with Elizabeth. And I think it's the first time I've shared this publicly. But somehow I felt nudged by Baba this morning to share that utter affirmation and appreciation. He was so touched by Elizabeth's love for him. That's what he communicated to my heart. So Jai Baba.
Judy? I've known you for quite a while, and I've never heard this story. Wow.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
it's resonating, Judy, with what I've been reading about what Baba said when he came in 52 the first time, about how much Elizabeth's love and Narina's love touched him so much, and every detail with love was given. And that's why this was his home that he loved the best. It's just reading, we've all read those passages, but it's very touching to think about them and read them again. And your story really makes that more vibrant. Thank you.
Yeah, it's Baba's gift to me. And, certainly to yeah, it was a message that's, I don't know, that, you know, Norina's grave was there, his own parents. There were many other options, but that was what, for reasons unknown to me, that he wanted to communicate that moment. Kathy, I would love it if you would share more about your time being with Elizabeth. The little stuff or big stuff. Just, I didn't have the good fortune to be with Elizabeth personally in when she was in the body. So I would love to hear more of your stories.
Yeah, I would love to share, but I feel like there must be other people that have stories to share too. I don't know. I mean, the other one I didn't mention was Jimmy the Turtle. You know, she loved animals, and she had been given this turtle that I think I heard had been Charles's, and somehow Elizabeth had taken the turtle. So the first job at coming to work was to take Jimmy out of his little Pyrex dish, fill the dish with new warmer water, and put this little rock back in the Pyrex dish, and then put Jimmy back on top of the rock at the bottom of the refrigerator exhaust so that his cold reptilian body would be warmed by the exhaust from the refrigerator. So, you know, just Jimmy was the first order of the day. And then somehow, I think maybe because Elizabeth loved sweets, she decided that Jimmy should have something good also. And one of the afternoon delights was to take the vanilla ice cream out of the freezer, put Jimmy up on the kitchen table, and scoop a big scoop of vanilla ice cream toward his excited, awaiting beak, as he would open his little turtle mouth, and in you would shove the vanilla ice cream and chomp, and then all the ice cream frothing around his little turtle face. I mean, that was one day when I was feeding Jimmy, Margaret Crass came in and sat down, and she says, "Oh, if your parents only knew how spiritual you were here." And I said, yes, I think I'll write them a letter. I'm being very spiritual, feeding the turtle ice cream at Dilruba. Anyway, but I'd love to hear other people's stories too.
I, I, this is Marion. I just wanted to speak up because I thought there was going to be, I don't know, thousands of people on this today. and I'll just very quickly say, I think I met Elizabeth just once down at the center, and the few times that I went down there, and knew that it was very special because, of course, Kitty was always in her office, and you had to go in and sit with Kitty and have a conversation. And Kitty came up to a Northeast gathering, but I don't think Elizabeth never did that when I was going to Northeast gatherings. So I am here today to take in these precious stories that you all have to share, because of course I've read so many, you know, over the years, and her spirit just is so alive. So I just wanted to say that because I have nothing else to contribute but that, and that my heart and mind is here. And thank you all very much.
Thanks, Marianne, for your appreciation. Chris has a hand up. Can you unmute Chris? Can you hear me, Chris?
Yep. I met Elizabeth I guess in 1969. The first time I got to the center was about a week or so after Bob had dropped the body. And of course, at that time, you new people went straight to Dilruba. And so I met them there. I don't have any particular stories, but I just remember being so impressed with the force of personality, the gravity of her person. You felt like you were in the presence of a great soul. And So over the years, I would see Elizabeth there at the center occasionally, and don't have any particular stories, but I do have one lovely photograph that I can share with you if you'd like to put me on screen share. I can show you that.
Okay. All right, Chris, you are now able to share. Can you share it?
Let's see. I think, let's see, cancel. Let me go back to what we're doing here. Somehow I lost my screen. There it is. Can you see this?
Yeah, it helps if you open your picture up on, get your picture open on your desktop and then hit screen share. There, oh, yeah. Wow.
Yep. So
Beautiful.
I think
Beautiful.
I can't remember where I was when I took that. I think it was in the might have been in the original kitchen, or it might have been at Dilruba, but at any rate, that was a lucky occurrence to get that beautiful picture of Elizabeth.
Oh, I've seen it many times before. It's iconic. Wow. Glad to
Yeah, it shares her the gravity of her soul, as you said, and her twinkle.
But yeah, she definitely had a sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure, Kathy, you remember lots of little stories about Elizabeth, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't really have any that I could share. But she also had that twinkle about her, as well as the seriousness and the attention to detail, and so she was just a wonderful, wonderful person to spend a little bit of time with. So, Jay Bob.
The gravity, you said the gravity of her being, she's had this poise and presence, a real presence. And when I would bring her downtown to do errands, I remember once there had been some minor problem at one of the shops, and when we left, the shop owner followed me out. Elizabeth must have already been ahead or in the car, because he said to me, as an aside, you know, if Elizabeth Patterson told you to go to hell, you'd gladly go. Ah. And once when I was bringing her back from church, she got talking about how in times gone by in her younger years, that it was common for the doctor to pay house calls. You know, the doctor would actually come to your home if you were sick. And she remembered a story that, you know, that that sort of illustrated the garrulousness of a particular doctor who was sitting by a bedside of a quite ill patient, and subsequently, her little joke was, you know, I've heard that sometimes the patient would be asked, would they like the doctor to come? And Elizabeth said that told me that the patient said, oh no, I'm much too sick for that. Meaning that the woman couldn't abide, or the man, the ill person couldn't abide having the doctor sitting there going on and on about trying to console the ailing patient. Another time, this is not about anything other than just, I remember it was coming home from church. I was feeling in, just trying to put together the whole concept of beads on one string. And I said to Elizabeth, does that mean that there's going to be like all these religions are going to merge together? And she was very emphatic about that each religious persuasion would be polished and lovingly accentuated in the best of its ism. And then strung on a string. It wouldn't be just one necklace with, no beads, but many beads shining lustrously for the beloved in different forms. And I don't know, it was just wonderful hearing that from her.
Kathy, didn't you also at one time say that on the ride back from the church, you asked her why she went to church since she had Mayor Baba?
You tell me that story. I might have forgotten it.
Well, maybe it was Lois who told me this,
Yeah,
but
maybe. Mhm.
anyway, that when Elizabeth was asked, why do you go to church? She went to the Methodist church every Sunday. And Elizabeth's response was that she went to take Baba to the church.
Oh my God, I felt that so strongly. She, her presence in Myrtle Beach was so monumental. And as I give tours every Friday to newcomers, I'm so aware of that. She was such an ambassador, in a time when the Southern Baptist Church, the whole Bible Belt vibration was so constrictive, and she was so important to be at the church every Sunday. Of course, her father had, helped to donate the money for the church. He built a hospital, he built the Chapin Library, so it was just incredible how much they were involved giving. I had heard from the nuns at the Catholic church where I had been teaching music, who came to her memorial at the center, that she had very quietly given a big sum of money to their St. Andrew's Catholic Church school to add a library to the St. Andrew's Church school. She did that quietly with all the religious persuasions and the black and white churches. So I was so aware when I sat next to her in church that she was an ambassador, and it was a very important role that she played.
Kathy, you mentioned beads on one string. My friend Ken Rickstead says that Baba didn't mention that he was first going to have to drill a hole in each religion.
Oh, that sounds like Ken. That's his great sense of humor. Yeah, yeah, deconstruct and reconstruct. I love it. Yeah, yes. Mm, yes. She really recently I went to donate Tom's autobiography, More Light, to the Chapin Library, got talking with the librarians, and then seeing the picture of Simeon Chapin there on the wall, I got talking about that just by chance that I had worked for Elizabeth and Kitty, and these librarians got so excited and, have they said there's so much more interest now in Myrtle Beach as people are moving here from out of the region, and sort of open-minded, many interested in history and different religious persuasions, and they're really wanting to know more. So would I give a talk and about Elizabeth, and some of them came to the center 2 weeks ago on a tour, and there's just this renewed kind of interest in Elizabeth Patterson and Simeon Chapin in Myrtle Beach. So that's just interesting. Just just by chance. That's because I went there, and they're just want to know more. They're just librarians and eager to hear more.
What a story, what a history of a town. Every town has a story. It's so unique that this is Baba's home.
Mhm. Yeah, and you know, as you all know, the center was I don't know what you want to call it, but the tax exempt status of the center was questioned twice, and lawyers were hired, and Elizabeth and Kitty were able, with help, to resist the you know, attempted takeover of or taking away the tax exempt status. And you know, as many of us who live here are so aware of what a gift that Elizabeth and Kitty and Narina, they all gave us, that this is just a, you know, a legacy. Elizabeth's a legacy that we have to keep protecting. I think the board is working with people to this day to make sure that the center is protected.
I found a nice quote. Tony Zois's Mayor Baba Travels is a great source for old stories and about Elizabeth. And here was a quote I found that Elizabeth and Norina were an extraordinary pair, so opposite in temperament. Norina was fiery, volatile, talkative. Elizabeth, quiet and immensely calm. Baba used to imitate them. Norina showed us how. Norina goes too fast. Elizabeth goes too slow. I have rarely seen Elizabeth get overwrought, perhaps about animal pets, of which she was so fond. Baba once told Elizabeth and Norina they had been together since the creation. I used to think it was Baba's peculiar avataric sense of humor, but it's comprehensible if both are members of his circle. Baba named Elizabeth Dilruba, meaning stealer of hearts. This is from Phyllis's Awakener. There's also a lovely quote at the end of her article. Elizabeth wrote for the Mayor Baba Journal, and they were kind of the seed, I guess, of what became the discourses. And she wrote up her spiritual journey with a modern guru in her journal. And in a section called Follow Love, she writes, love often stirs the heart through a little thing in life, and at the same time has the possibility to end with the greatest thing in life. As much as we all desire love, it is rare to find one soul who dares even the thought of its ultimate completion, rising above all duality and play of opposites to become truly one through God realization. The personification of divine love on earth is the God-man, who is love, lover, and the beloved. So this is Elizabeth's quotation from her book, Spiritual Journey with the Modern Guru.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else have oh, Anne, yes, you have a hand up.
I wanted to mention also about Elizabeth's role in driving Mayor Baba to the West Coast and the accident, and the fact that she almost died in that accident, and Mara almost died in the accident. Elizabeth was pinned behind the driver's the seat and the wheel, and broke her collarbone and some of her ribs. And in one of the doctor's reports from Duke University, and I can't recall now which book this is in, but the doctor said that he was amazed that she had not died on the trip in the ambulance back to South Carolina, because the broken, jagged end of her collarbone was so close to her artery, just within a fraction of an inch. and that it was amazing that she didn't die. So I think that it's so important to see the role that the women played in that accident and the gravity of their sacrifice. Thank you.
And of course, as we all know, the amazing story of the flower Baba gave her in
Yeah.
Harmon.
Mhm.
I mean, just can you imagine how she felt, not just physically, but emotionally, and Baba bringing her that reassurance that it was something that he had ordained and not a mistake she had made.
I wonder, Carrie, Kathy, could you tell it just briefly? I know we know, but this will be recorded and there might be a person who will see this who doesn't know that story.
So Baba was in Harmon on Hudson, north of New York City in 31, 32, 34, and this happened in 1932, that he walked with a number of his disciples, leaned over and picked a little flower near the home where they were staying north of New York City, and gave it to Elizabeth, and he said, keep this, preserve it, write the date. Years later, as she opened her family Bible and saw the pressed flower after the accident, she had this happen, that she opened her family Bible and saw the dried flower with the date May 24th, 1932. Of course, the accident took place May 24th, 1952, 20 years to the day. And it was, I can't even imagine what Elizabeth must have experienced when she saw that.
She probably had felt a lot of guilt about the accident and her role as the driver. So that helped to assuage that guilt that she had felt.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And of course, it is such a sacred item. It is preserved to this day and displayed at Baba's house on the Meher Center. Yes.
Betty, I might reiterate what you were saying about Elizabeth's article and a series of articles in the Mayor Baba Journal. In our Tuesday night reading group here in Asheville, we recently read Treasures from the Mayor Baba Journal, the one that Jane Haynes had edited back many years ago. And in that are a series of excerpts from Elizabeth's articles from the Mayor Baba Journal. And we found those to be some of the most beautiful writing in the whole book. Elizabeth is an extraordinary writer, and with great insight into the spiritual realm and into Baba's work and so forth. So that's well worth reading, is to get that Treasures from the Mayor Baba Journals and read Elizabeth's articles in there. They're just great.
And along those lines, Chris, Kitty mentioned that Elizabeth wrote poetry and that she was a wonderful poet. And she did mention that she felt that some of the earlier poems had a kind of a bit of a melancholy twist. And I think Elizabeth was yearning for, her to find her beloved. And those early poems might have reflected that. And yeah, she of course, thank goodness, found the love of her life.
Were those poems published? I know probably a few were, I think, in the Mayor Baba Journal and other places, but maybe not all of them.
I don't know. I'm assuming probably Charles and Wendy must have those poems, I think. Maybe some of them will grace the pages of their Elizabeth biography when that comes out.
Oh, I didn't.
Another remembrance that is bubbling up in my mind. I befriended Evelina Graham, who was the African American woman who had worked in the kitchen for many years, and she always would talk about the baba. I met the baba, and served the baba, and she was a wonderful gift in my life, as well as Kitty and Elizabeth. And after Elizabeth had passed, she said one day she had this very powerful dream in which Elizabeth, a younger Elizabeth, was running toward a man in a white gown and throwing herself into his arms. And I said, Evelina, that was Baba. That must have been what you saw, what happened after she passed. And Evelina just for some reason had never thought about that. And she was so happy to think that, Elizabeth, free from her bent body, running young and free into beloved Baba's arms.
Sweet one.
Mm.
Well, at this point, I'd like to recommend Kathy's book. Maybe you've read it. I'm discovering it with this careful journaling of wonderful, wonderful little stories. And the days with Elizabeth, and then most of it is Kitty. Elizabeth passed after the first year. But wow, it's such a treat to dip into this book and spend a little time there with Kathy and friends, Dana, Perry, and others, and Elizabeth and Kitty. I'm so glad, Kathy, that you were so careful. How you got it all. You copied it. So
I have to say thank you to Lois Brager, who would pass me in the hall, and she had worked with Kitty on Kitty's autobiography, and she would be either muttering agony because it wasn't easy working there, or telling me a Kittyism, and I started keeping journals because the Kittyisms were so hysterical, and that was the beginning. And then it hit me a week or two after keeping the Kittyisms in a book that this was an amazing opportunity being around these women. And luckily I would just make a point every time I worked there, I would not go to sleep until I had written down what happened every day, because a couple of times I let it go and then I couldn't remember. So I just made that my, discipline. And thank goodness I did.
goodness, yeah.
Because when I started looking at the diaries, many of those stories I had forgotten already. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for liking the book.
Even though this is an Elizabeth meeting, can you tell a couple of Kittyisms?
Oh my God. Okay. Very funny. The first one that comes to my mind. Okay. Sheila Krinsky had painted a, oh my God. She had painted a portrait of Kitty, and it was so masculine and not at all sort of soft or appealing to me, I have to say. Okay, sorry, Sheila. But anyway, that I was a little shocked when she presented it to Kitty, and Kitty says, "Oh, yes, that reveals my animus. We all have anima and animus. We have masculine and feminine, and this really portrays the masculine side of my personality." Yes. I mean, she looked at the best in everything. Okay. So she put it up on the wall. A month or two later, Sheila said she came to Dilruba. She didn't see the portrait, the painting, and she said, Kitty, where's my portrait of you? And Kitty says, oh, yes, yes. And she led Sheila into her bedroom, opened the closet door, and there was hanging the painting, completely hidden from sight. And Kitty said to Sheila, oh, yes, yes, well, I've put it here because, well, I didn't want Elizabeth to be sick. Oh my God. Oh God. Oh, okay, this is related to Elizabeth, right? She didn't want Elizabeth to be sick. Okay, so here's another kittyism that had to do with Elizabeth. Every afternoon, she would take a nap. Usually she would turn on her classical music and crank it way up so that the phone calls that were they just nonstop, wouldn't bother her during her nap time. And she'd sometimes read the Time magazine, and she would bring Jimmy and sit him on her bed. So there was the loud music and the Jimmy the Turtle, and the Time magazine had fallen on top of Jimmy when I came in to wake her up. And she got up and she saw that the magazine had fallen on top of Jimmy, and she removed it and looked down at Jimmy. He just looked up at her. I don't know what he was thinking. And she said, oh, yes, yes, yes. There are there are two of us in the house that love classical music. Me and Jimmy. And I said, what do you mean? She says, well, I don't really think Elizabeth likes classical music all that much, but I know I do, and Jimmy does too. And I said, Kitty, how do you know Jimmy loves classical music? She says, well, look, he's listening right now, and he's just got his head out of his shell, and I guess he must have been listening. So that's Elizabeth related.
You've got a story or something to share.
Who else?
And maybe you can.
Yes, I wanted to tell a couple of little stories that occurred to me. One was Carrie Bills used to work. Do you remember Carrie?
Yeah.
And Carrie lives in Austin now. But we had a meeting one time and she told this story, which was hilarious, that as a young woman, and I mean, she was early 20s when she worked there with Kitty and Elizabeth. And of course, she didn't want to just stay at home every night. And so she would sometimes go out and go partying with her friends and come back, and it'd be quite late and the door would be locked. And so she would go and knock on the window for Kitty's room, and Kitty would open the window and let her crawl in, because Kitty said, well, now you mustn't let Elizabeth find out. Another story was one that Marion, my Uncle Marion, told me. He said, a funny thing that happened was when my wife died, of course, I was very sad, and I had a knock at the door, and the Western Union man was there with a cable, and it was from Elizabeth Patterson. Elizabeth had gotten confused and thought that he had passed away rather than his wife. And so the telegram was full of all these accolades and what a wonderful person he was. And Marion said, and that gave me the biggest laugh right at a time when I really needed a laugh. And he said, I held on to that cable for years and years. So that was a good story about Elizabeth too.
Didn't he say something like you just never know what people think of you while you're alive? Something like that.
He would say, it just goes to show that you never know what people think about you until you die.
Uh, I have-
Betty, I need to go soon. I'm hoping, but I'd love to see part of the film that you have on Elizabeth.
I intend, thank you. That's just what I needed. This meeting is so rich. I was wondering, shall I show it?
Please.
But reminding all of you that you have access anytime. I'll put it's in our gallery. It's the December 2020 celebration of Elizabeth's life. I will, but I did want to just interject one more story from here. It's on Elizabeth's birthday. And so that might be a good way to close this part of the meeting. Kitty says, I'm sorry, Kathy says, today is Elizabeth's birthday, July 26th. Evelina Graham, Dillaruba's wonderful cook, proudly showed me the delicious looking cake she had made. She and her mother-in-law, Bessie, had cooked for Baba when he was at the center in the 1950s. Kitty was talking to Evelina about a member of the Black community who met Baba back then. Evelina smiled broadly as she knows him and his family. There's so much love between them, meaning Evelina and Elizabeth. Evelina told me that Bessie had brought her along to help cook for Elizabeth, Kitty, and Baba, and that she was very fond of the Baba, as she called him. Then she added a funny story about a dish Bessie had made for them. Kitty wanted fried prawns for dinner. So in the morning, she gave Bessie a handwritten list of what to prepare. To everyone's surprise, a mysterious looking brown entree was served. No shrimp in sight. When Kitty asked Bessie what the dish was, she replied that she had cooked fried prunes, just as Kitty had requested. She had misread Kitty's handwriting. And this was Elizabeth's birthday.
She'd put what in there? Fried what?
Prunes.
Oh, prune.
And Kitty had said prawn, and prawn, that's not a southern kind of a word, or pretty close to prunes, I guess.
Bessie, to her credit, followed instructions. Oh, there's so many wonderful stories. Thank you so much, Kathy, Ann, Chris.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Yes. Yes. And yes, thank you. I too want to express my gratitude. Thank you, Judy, for what you shared. You said this isn't something you just commonly share. And Kathy, everyone on there, and Kathy, thank you for being this presentation. And it's been so much meaningful for me. Thank you.
You really brought Elizabeth alive. I never met her. It's so wonderful to hear your experiences. Thank you so much, dear God.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Kathy. All right.
Thank you.
So now, I'm going to say Baba 3 times. We're ending part 1 of this meeting, and then I will play that movie for those who want to stay. And as long as you can go or come and go as you like, it's a long one.
Can I say one thing? I want to say one thing before you switch to part 2. I didn't meet Elizabeth, but I remember the first time I went to India, I was invited to a tea at Dillaruba, and I read her book, and I felt like this really helped because I felt like I knew her, but I didn't meet her. But anyway, thank you.
A lot of us feel that. Yeah. Thank you. So does anybody have any last word they want to?
I have one more word. The first time I went to Myrtle Beach, near the guest house, right in the middle of the road was a huge turtle. So that made me think about her. Now I have to hear the story about the turtle. But it was big, with bearing its eggs in the middle of the road.
right. Well, all right, well, thank you. Thank you for wonderful stories, Kath, and song, Kathy, and Judy, everyone. Can we say together 3 times again, Meher Baba, Avatar,
Mayor.
Mayor Baba,
DJ.
DJ.
Avatar,
Mayor
Mayor
Baba,
Baba,
DJ. Avatar,
Avatar,
Mayor
Mayor Baba,
Key.
DJ.
Thank
Now I will turn off the recording and I will share, I'll share, continue